Some people hide their dark sides so well that you can live next to violent criminals for years without realizing it. But when evil comes to light, everything secret comes to light as well. Something like this happened recently in Ecuador. The heroine of today's story lived in Sangolquí in the Pichincha province of Ecuador. Her name was Paola Ortega. The woman was the mother of 2 daughters who were 14 and 4 years old at the time of the tragedy. She and her husband ran a small business in the city center. They operated a shop in Quito, where they sold party and festive items such as balloons, piñatas, and other necessary things. Paola's entire family worked in this business. Her parents, brothers, and sisters sold and ran the shop. It was a very prosperous family that everyone in Sangolquí knew. They had been working together for many years, which gave them a solid reputation. This was mainly thanks to Paola's father, who invested in the business and didn't fail. The young business people were sociable and friendly. They raised 2 daughters, the elder of whom was from another man, but the new husband accepted her as his own daughter and was a role model for good parenting. The idyll lasted until the tragic event. On Monday, January 2nd, 2023, Paola woke up in her apartment. Her husband, Christian, was in Quito that day and planned to arrive in Sangolquí around 6 p.m. For personal reasons, the woman had been at her sales location all day, finishing her work. The workday was nearing its end. Normally, she had an assistant with her, but he was not there that day. While she was arranging the goods in the display case, 2 unknown men entered the room. When Paola saw them, she was immediately frightened, because they looked quite threatening. She felt they had come to kill her. One of the men approached the cash register and began speaking to Paola. He said he wanted to buy inflatable balloons for an upcoming child's birthday party. It was obvious he was trying to deceive his victim, as the other man was near the door, looking around attentively. Paola moved away from the cash register and indicated she needed to contact the manager. However, she didn't call the police or anyone else, but called her mother and told her about the suspicious men in the store. Her mother suggested closing the shop since it was already late in the evening and no customers were coming anyway. Her mother was already retired at that time, but promised to come to the shop as soon as possible. Paola then called her husband and told him what had happened, but he told her that the shop should not be closed, as these people looked like customers and would probably buy something. Subsequently, the mother contacted her daughter again, continuing to convince her that the shop should be closed, and left the business. However, she didn't listen and referred to her husband's words. Finally, the 2 men realized she was making a fuss and simply left. Mother managed to persuade Paola to leave the shop, and she closed it about an hour after the mysterious strangers arrived. Around 7 p.m., she suggested going home and having dinner there. But Christian refused because his older daughter wanted hamburgers, and he offered to pick them up. Paola called her daughter, who replied that she hadn't asked for food, but agreed since her parents were going to buy some anyway. So, the 2 got into their pickup truck and drove to the fast food restaurant. Christian parked the car a block away from the restaurant, which was completely uncharacteristic for him, as he usually drove recklessly, blocking traffic, crossing pedestrian crossings, and ignoring traffic signs whenever he pleased. This time, however, he stopped properly and far from the restaurant. He got out, leaving his wife in the car, saying it was too cold outside and he was afraid she would freeze. Following events were reconstructed from surveillance camera recordings, among which was, coincidentally, the car of the businessman Pays. 2 unknown men approached the vehicle. Paola couldn't get out. She thought she was safe inside. The husband locked the vehicle before leaving, but when the 2 individuals approached, the headlights flashed suspiciously, indicating that the locks were unlocked and the doors were open. Paola could feel the danger inside. She realized that the attackers meant business. She quickly squeezed into the back of the cab. She couldn't run anywhere and was trapped. The car was open, so the intruders had no problem getting in through the doors. One of them stayed in the driver's seat and called someone, while the second climbed into the back of the car and stabbed Paola several times in the face, neck, and shoulder blade. The attackers then fled, leaving the victim to bleed to death. However, she was still alive. A few minutes later, her husband, Christian Navarreto, returned to the scene. The man, however, appeared very calm. He didn't help his wife, but immediately grabbed his phone and called emergency services. To the operator's questions, he remained silent for a few seconds and then ended the call. Then he called a relative of Paula's, who turned out to be her cousin. Initially, he told him that his wife had been kidnapped, but later corrected himself, saying he had found her body with stab wounds. Cousin said the woman should be taken to the hospital immediately, to which Christian replied that he was just about to do that and ended the call. Nearby, just a few blocks away, there was a hospital where the victim could be treated. The attack occurred around 7:28 p.m. At 7:28 p.m., however, Christian called emergency services, ended the call, and then contacted the victim's family. After that, he did something else with his phone for some time. Eventually, the man got behind the wheel but did not drive to the nearest clinic, even though he knew the city well. He should have known that the nearest medical facility, open around the clock, was just around the corner. Instead, he drove to the farthest hospital he could find on the map, where a nurse knew Paula's relative. By this time, the victim was still alive but in critical condition because she had lost a lot of blood, as the blood-splattered interior of the family car revealed. Paramedics saw stab wounds on the woman's body and reported the incident to the police. Police officers were dispatched to the clinic to investigate the circumstances of the attack on the woman. Despite the doctor's help, Paula lost too much blood and died on the operating table. When the doctors informed her husband that Paula had died, he began to behave very strangely. Initially, he pulled his hair and screamed, kicked furniture, and nervously walked back and forth in the office between the window and the door. After a while, however, the man noticed the surprised reaction of the paramedics and suddenly calmed down. Christian did not cry or show any remorse over his wife's death. After the attack, the man calmly checked something on his phone and took no further action. When the police arrived at the scene, they spoke with the deceased's husband. Christian was calm and said he was lucky as he had gone to get hamburgers at the moment his wife was attacked by unknown assailants. According to him, she was clearly the victim of a robbery, as several valuables were missing. Christian stated that he had left the car locked and that Paula had refused to go with him because it was quite cold and she was tired. When the man returned, he found his wife injured and the car unlocked, whereupon he immediately contacted the emergency services and took his wife to the hospital. At this point, he was not suspected of being involved in the incident. Everyone knew the couple as respectable people who had been together for many years and had raised 2 daughters. Christian was always very close to his wife, his daughters, and his entire family. There were hundreds of photos of the young couple's happy faces in various moments. It all seemed like a true idyll and an exemplary life. However, the police first had to check the people who had last been in contact with the victim of the attack. They naturally decided to start with the husband. Investigators traveled to the restaurant where Christian said he had gone at the time of the attack. Fortunately, there were surveillance cameras, and the police officers requested access to the footage. After reviewing the footage, the investigators initially suspected the man was involved in the incident. Christian said he had locked the car and gone to get food, that he had supposedly left the engine running so his wife wouldn't freeze. However, the footage showed that as soon as he was in the restaurant, he took his car key out and unlocked the doors. This was not a casual gesture, but as if he had deliberately planned everything so he was not out of the car's control system range, still far enough away not to arouse suspicion. Criminals immediately jumped into the open car. It was as if they were waiting for his signal, and they acted too coherently. As soon as the locks were unlocked, the attackers were already near their target, and none of this seemed like a coincidence. Even Christian's behavior after finding his injured wife seemed too strange. The man hadn't even tried to help her. He had hesitated for a long time before taking her to a clinic, to the farthest one. seemed as if the man had an interest in his wife's death. After examining the scene, the forensic scientists took the victim's body to the lab for analysis. Forensic experts found 11 stab wounds on her body, most of them on the neck. This damaged major arteries, which, combined with the long wait for help, led to the woman's death. If the husband had immediately notified the emergency services about the attack, and if the doctors had arrived quickly on the scene, or if they had taken her to the nearest clinic, Paula's chances of survival would have been quite high. It looked as if the victim's husband had carefully planned the whole thing. Parked the car behind the dumpsters so it would not be visible in the neighboring streets. The perpetrators obviously knew Paula would be there and would not be seen in such a secluded place. The only problem was that they did not notice the cameras on the building, which recorded the crime scene and all their actions. Less than 24 hours after the attackers had stabbed their victim, police began considering her husband the main suspect. In the coffee shop's video footage, it was clearly seen how he went to the window and unlocked the car. At the same time, in the footage of the camera that recorded the vehicle, a headlight could be seen. This confirmed the suspicion of law enforcement that Paola had not opened the door for the attackers herself, rather her husband. The incident was initially classified as a failed robbery attempt, but nothing was missing from the couple's car. Christian told the police that his wife had been robbed of a gold chain and that the robbers had also taken $600 from her. These claims proved false. Quickly, suspicion arose that this event was a carefully planned murder. Therefore, on January 3, 2023, Christian Navarrete was arrested. The man was suspected of being involved in the attack on his wife. From the beginning, he denied any involvement in the incident and accused the police officers of not even looking for other possible suspects, focusing all their attention on him. However, investigators were certain of his involvement. Only the motive for the attack had yet to be determined. The police confiscated the man's phone for examination. Police officers were outraged by Christian's behavior in a critical situation. Instead of helping his wife and calling for help, he obviously deliberately stalled for time. The husband did not choose the nearest clinic but went to the farthest one. This approach was also considered a delaying tactic that would take away the victim's chance of survival. At this point, the wife was bleeding out inside the car. After checking the main suspect's phone, the police found that he had indeed made the emergency call. This happened almost immediately when Christian returned to his vehicle. However, after the dispatcher answered the call, he remained silent for about 2 seconds and then ended the call without saying a word. When the police officer asked him about it, he said he had deliberately ended the call because he realized he did not know the exact address of where he and his wife were located. According to him, Christian wanted to check the address on the map, but it turned out that this did not work in this critical situation due to geolocation problems, so he could not call back and give the address. His response was vague and evasive, indirectly confirming the police's suspicions. The officers then requested a list of the calls the man made on the day of the attack on his wife. It turned out that on January 2nd, he had made more than 15 calls to the same number, and it was necessary to find out whose phone number it was. Moreover, Christian made a transfer of $2,000 just 4 minutes after the attack on his wife, which also looked suspicious. After checking the account number, the investigators found it was registered to a woman. She was quickly located and became the main suspect in this case. However, the woman had a solid alibi and provided useful information for the investigation. According to her, her cousins had asked to use her bank account shortly before the incident. The men were named Byron and Mortis Castillo and resembled the men seen on surveillance footage where the victim's car was parked. Both brothers had a severe criminal record with many violent incidents. The investigation revealed that Christian had taken the men to the shop where his wife worked sometime before the incident. He took them in his car and showed them the premises of their small business, probably to plan the crime and select a location for the attack. It was determined that Christian had paid them $2,000 a few days before the attack, probably as an advance payment. A second payment was due after the woman was successfully killed, and it was made before the husband took the bleeding woman to the hospital. Police learned that the signs of the murder attempt had been established for about a month. On December 8, 2022, Paola's car was stolen. When reviewing the surveillance material, they found the same two men. At that moment, however, the investigation stalled. Police had no time to find out the names of the robbers because Christian interfered. He said the perpetrators had contacted him and offered to return personal belongings from the car. The man drove to meet them and came back with the entire contents of the trunk and glove compartment, including his wife's wallet, which contained money and cards, were obviously untouched. When the police officers learned of this, they were very surprised, as such a scenario was not typical of their work. It was unclear why Christian had not informed the officers he had been contacted by criminals. At the same time, the investigators suspected a connection between the two incidents. Car thieves had stolen the car and then became the perpetrators of the murder. Christian was aware that he was only one step away from prison and came up with a new story. He had to somehow justify the fact that he had met the criminals. This was confirmed by the police when they analyzed the location data, all three accomplices of the murder. The investigation revealed that all three had met several times shortly before the crime. When Christian was directly informed of this, he began accusing his accomplices of extortion. According to him, the family made good money, supported by their own business, and the Castillo brothers were representatives of organized crime. Therefore, they demanded monthly protection payments from Christian and his wife, and threatened to burn down their business if they refused to pay. The main suspect admitted that he had paid them protection money shortly before his wife's murder. Christian was forced to cooperate with them because they promised to harm his relatives. He didn't pay. However, he did not pay in time, so the attack on his wife is proof of the criminal's seriousness. This not only explained the personal meetings with these individuals, but also the transfer of money and the fact that he took them in his car and drove them around the gift shop. Based on the information received, police arrested the perpetrators. Byron immediately confessed that he had received $2,000 from the crime's contract, but not as a monthly protection fee, but as a down payment for the murder of Paola. He also received the remaining amount after the attack. According to testimonies, the brothers used their cousin's bank account to cover their tracks. On November 29, 2023, all three involved in the murder of Paola Ortega appeared in court, where the statements of more than 60 witnesses were collected to bring to light the truth about the relationship between the spouses and other aspects of the tragedy. It turned out that Christian was not such a good husband as the victim's family thought. For years, the woman concealed that her husband had become violent in their marriage. Christian was 3 years younger than his wife. At the time of the attack, he was 31. This insignificant difference, however, was for him a reason to mock and insult her. The man constantly called his partner ugly and old, accused her of being useless, and threatened to leave her. It became known that he threatened to take away their 4-year-old daughter. She was his biological child. Older 14-year-old girl was from another man. Although Christian had actually raised both, he loved only his own daughter and wanted to take only her. In his correspondence, the man noted that he would take her to Colombia, where he would start a new life and never see Paola again. The man's neglectful behavior was evident in everything. Paola knew he had cheated on her with at least 6 different women. Nevertheless, she forgave her husband's affairs. She carefully concealed all these horrors from her family and friends, fearing her parents' wrath. Besides, she had long feared for her husband before the tragedy, because Paola's father was a pretty tough and serious man. Therefore, he had been a deterrent for Christian for a long time. But 2 years before the massacre, Paola's father died of COVID-19, which completely unleashed Christian. After the death of his father-in-law, he stopped pretending and showed his true face. The man was confident of his impunity and his wife's defenselessness and began pressuring her from all sides. At this point, serious conflicts began, psychological and physical violence. It is worth noting that the man also hid what was happening from his family, so no one could help Paola. Christian not only humiliated the woman in every possible way, but also began to regularly cheat on her, not hiding their relationship. All this information was gathered by investigators from various sources, particularly from messengers, through which the spouses remained in contact. A series of testimonies were collected from friends of the couple, who suspected that Christian was only pretending to be an exemplary husband and loving father. When all this evidence was collected, Christian was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. This evidence was presented in court. The victim's family was shocked. Paola had hidden all these horrors of family life so well that they didn't even notice what was happening until it was too late. The family of the murdered woman was stunned by the scale of the lies and the fact that they had thought only good things about this man for years. They decided to get justice at all costs and hired a good lawyer. The first thing their defense attorney looked for was evidence of the toxicity of the relationship between the spouses. Obviously, the motive for the murder was primarily money. Paola's father had painstakingly built a business, which he bequeathed to his daughter. Christian hoped to take everything for himself and run it alone, to rob the victim's family of everything that had been achieved through hard work. The man seemed to have completely forgotten that Paola's father had been the key person in building the family business. The prosecutor's office was shocked by Christian's decision. He could have acted according to his conscience and told his wife directly that he wanted to separate. They could have divorced and then divided the jointly acquired property, even the business. Everyone could have counted on their share. Christian could not get enough. He wanted to deprive everyone of the right to run the business and gain sole custody of the child. Police found that Christian had initially wanted the murder to be committed by the helpers in the gift shop. This was supposed to happen on the same day when Paola was almost attacked by two men in the shop. However, the woman sensed that something was wrong when two strangers came in at the end of the day to buy balloons. They behaved clearly suspiciously and scared off the victim. After that, they did not continue the robbery in the shop. Christian became nervous. At that time, he was far from the scene, so the police would not suspect he had anything to do with it. However, after the call from the hired gunman, the defendant realized he urgently needed to improvise. The man urgently returned to Sangolki. Here, he looked for a pretext to take his wife to a deserted place and literally serve her to the contract killers on a silver platter. By an unfortunate coincidence, Paola's daughter agreed to the hamburgers the man had invented as an excuse to lure the victim. Christian's defense argued that he was innocent. All the suspicious behavior was somehow justified. It was a coincidence, and he was in any case a loving husband. However, the prosecution presented enough evidence to convict the man of abuse and violence against his wife. Paola's silence and her relatives' ignorance of Christian's tyranny ultimately led to the death of the successful woman. Numerous recordings from various surveillance cameras, as well as the testimonies of dozens of people, helped expose the false image of the crime's contractor. During the investigation, it was suspected that Christian had psychopathic traits. The victim's sister noted that Paola's partner's behavior raised such suspicion. She confirmed that the man sometimes behaved very aggressively towards other people. The prison psychiatrist who worked with the defendant concluded that Christian's behavior after the attack on his wife was typical of people with psychopathy. According to the expert, such people have serious problems in the emotional sphere. They feel no empathy, manipulate without feeling responsibility or guilt. The psychologist suspected that there had been conflicts in the couple's marriage that led to Christian's outbursts of anger toward his wife. Despite the numerous testimonies against Christian, the trial dragged on for almost a year. The result was conclusive proof that the victim's husband and murderers had developed a plan to kill the woman. Byron became the main accomplice and also the main perpetrator as he stabbed the defenseless victim. After deliberating on the case, the jury concluded that all three were guilty. Each was sentenced to 34 years and 8 months in prison. Although the victim's family managed to achieve justice, they have not yet overcome the bitterness of the loss. The youngest daughter, who was only 4 years old at the time of her mother's murder, remembers her well and has an imaginary friend she calls Mama. For the 14-year-old girl, the incident was a severe blow. Due to the psychological shock, she even had to be hospitalized. Paola's mother blames herself, believing she was too short-sighted to see the real circumstances in her daughter's family, and didn't help Paola. Not a day went by that she didn't remember her with tears in her eyes. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.